TV Boot Club with Specsavers.
The report tells the story of the Bethnal Green tube station disaster, which is a real event that happened during the war. It was a crush in the stairwell of the tube station, which had been used as an air raid shelter during the war. But on this particular night, something went terribly wrong. On March 1st, 1943, there'd been a very bad raid of Berlin. And so people read the papers, people knew that had happened, that the Allies had bombed Berlin, and they expected a retaliatory raid. So on the night of March 3rd, at 8:17 p.m., there was a siren. There just seemed to be a large number of people coming to the shelter all at one time. Several buses let out, a couple of movie theaters let out, and it was just a case of sort of too many people in a tight space. Tragically, there were no bombs that night, so that made it even worse. And 173 people, mostly women and children, were crushed as they descended the steps. I went to the newspaper articles first to see what people were thinking about and reading about and how they followed the war. How was that possible to do when you were living in London in 1943? I studied the shelter drawings of Henry Moore to get a sense of the feeling of what it must have been like to be down there. Before the bunks were put in, people slept on the tracks, if you can imagine. They just brought in their own bedding and slept on the tracks. And then a whole structure evolved, and some of the most organized ones had libraries and canteens and little theaters for shows, and they were just, I think, amazing. The book uses the specific, devastating tragedy of the Bethnal Green tube station disaster as a way to examine the things that happen after any large public tragedy. The book attempts to show how that plays out in a small community at a certain point in time.
No one enjoys it.
Now, I live not far from Bethnal Green, and I've been to the tube station a lot, and there's a tiny little plaque for an event of such a major number of people that lost their lives. And I thought this was a really great tribute to a very forgotten incident in British history. And I know you live quite...
I live in Bethnal Green. Yeah. One of my neighbours was an air raid warden on the night in question, genuinely.
What I find staggering about it is I had never heard of it. And you realise why. A tragedy like this, huge tragedy that happens in the middle of a war, so there are other things on people's minds, and it's probably easy to cover up. But I'm sure if something like that happened in peacetime, everyone would know about it.
She's given herself quite a hard task, though, hasn't she? Because it's a real event, but this, in fact, is a fiction.
Yeah.
She's just used this event to jump off into imagining what the braided lives of all the people involved in it were.
And the varied community that those people come from. I think that's very well reflected. But for all of us, really, it was a fascinating insight into a sort of hidden piece of World War history.
The TV Boot Club with Specsavers.